So in this video, we're going to talk about CSS Grids. So I've gone ahead into the HTML document and I've just simplified it. So I've just put what we need. I got rid of some of those button events and all that stuff, just so it's going to be a little bit easier for you to see. So I've got the button here, I've got the input, and I've got the div, and I've got rid of all the IDs. So what I'm literally just doing is giving a class for each called button1, input1, and div1. So they've each got their own class, and each class has its own name. Now with CSS Grids, what we're trying to accomplish is we're trying to move these elements around and space them. So how we're going to do that is we're basically going to make an imaginary grid, and then we're going to put those into the grid spaces. So there's a good little visual here on this site. You can just see, the header is stretched across here. The menu is going on the left, so it's taking up some boxes there. Main and right take up here, and then the footer spans right across them. So you can start to divide up your web page and put things where you want them. Okay, so we're basically going to do that with our little elements here. We're just going to start to move them around and just see how you can do that. So CSS is very literal. Unfortunately, you can't just drag and drop. You have to say where you want everything. So we're going to go into the style sheet and we're going to start accessing that. Now the first thing we're going to need is a wrapper. So a wrapper is more of a theoretical concept. It's a way of saying all of this should be put into a box that's then going to be arranged this way. So I'm going to do a div. I'm going to do div, and I'm just going to put this inside of the div. Now I'm going to give this a name. I'm going to give it an ID of main wrapper. So you don't actually have to use the word wrapper in wrapper, but it does make sense. So we have main wrapper, and all this stuff is inside the main wrapper, right? Because maybe we have different elements down here and we want to group them separately, and maybe they're arranged in their own way. So main wrapper is just kind of a way of saying the whole page, everything inside, this is how it's going to be laid out. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start spacing them. So we're going to go into our style sheet and we're going to reference them. So they're all classes. So we have button1 like that. We have input1, and we have div1. Now we also added that wrapper in, so we want that one as well. So we're going to do wrapper, I think it was main wrapper, like that. And that one's got the hashtag because it is a ID, whereas these ones are all classes. Okay. So once we have that, we're going to set this up. So we're going to say display everything inside of that wrapper as a grid. So if you actually wanted this to be invisible, you could say none. So it's actually not going to display it. So let's say we had wrapped this and then we had wrapped something else. You could maybe make this all go hidden and then have it show again, or you could make the other one kind of come in and out, right? So you can switch between stuff, and it's just a way of doing that. So we're going to just say everything is inside this main wrapper. We are going to all say it's displaying as a grid, and you can already see it started to make changes here. So it's already started to format. It said basically just put one column here, and it's just stuck everything one after the other. But we can arrange that really, really specifically. We can say grid, but then we can actually line up the elements. So first we have to just let the grid know what we can put inside it. So we're going to do that like this. We're going to say grid area, and we're going to call that, I'm just going to call it the same thing as the class. So we're basically saying in this grid that we are about to make, the space that this button1 is going to occupy is called button1. So it's a bit confusing. We're just calling one ID some other ID, but you'll see how it works once we have it laid out. So grid area, let's call this input1, and down here we'll say the same thing, div1. Okay, so now we can actually use these new IDs that we've just created, and they're actually going to move these elements wherever we want them. So I can go like this. I can say button1, input1, and div1. So what that's going to do is you can actually see it's lined them up like that. So now it's put them 1, 2, 3 in the right order. So it's really handy. It's very visual. You can kind of see where everything goes. I could do it, I could switch those around. I could put input after the div, So here, if you're looking up at the top left, I'll save it and you'll actually see those move around like that. So regardless of how you actually have them laid out in the HTML document, this is what's going to actually place them. So this is where they're all going to end up going. Now I can do multiple rows. So let's say I wanted button 1 to go down, and let's say I wanted them all to go down like that. I could just copy paste, and that's going to work. Now you can't actually see that because there's not very much space. So let's set the height to, let's say, I don't know, 100 pixels. So once you do this grid area thing, that's not the only thing. It's just one of many things that you're doing inside this class. So I can still change all the styling and stuff, and it's just gonna go in there. So let's put the height, maybe more than that. Let's do like 400 pixels. There we go. And I'll do that for all the others, just to see it. So you can see button 1, it kind of like goes down along that column. So that's what's going to happen over here. It's just taking up that whole column. Now I could do something like this. I could do, maybe put button 1 across the top. So like that. Again, it's just very visual, right? You can just decide how it's going to look. I'll put div 1 here and here. And then I'll have input 1 taking up these 4 spaces. There. So now it's kind of turned into that, which is what I wanted. So the button's all the way up here, and then these two are split there and there. And just to see that a little clearer, we'll change the background color to, let's do aqua. You can tell I am not a graphic designer by my color choices. Okay, let's go with, I don't know, what do we got here? Crimson maybe? There we go. So you can actually see once you have background colors that we're kind of putting them into this nice little grid, just how we declared them up here. So that's CSS grids. You can take as many elements as you want, just give them each a class name, so a specific class name, like div 1, input 1, button 1, whatever you want to call it. Then you're going to go over here, you're going to create a, you're going to reference that ID or that class. And then inside there, you're going to say the grid area that this class is going to take up is going to be called something new. It is nice just to call it the same thing as the class, so there's no confusion there, but it doesn't have to be. I could have called that button 2. And then as long as I came up here and I type button 2, button 2, button 2, it's still going to work, right? It's just stylistically a little nicer not to have some weird change there. So I've done the same down here. I've said the grid area that this input 1 is going to take up. Let's refer to that as input 1, so that up here it's going to place input 1, and same with div 1. So that's CSS grids. You can just move stuff around, kind of style it, and you can also just change the colors as well inside of the class reference here.